Hello, it's Dr. Cindy again with this week's mental health moment. Last week, I introduced a technique to help you begin to shift your views about challenging situations that occur so they don't get responded to and recorded as more evidence of negative perceptions about yourself. The goal is to not keep adding to the collection of memories that we have stored away in our minds as painful reminders of our perceived inadequacies. Additionally, we can use the same technique to also reprocess challenging memories from the past. So today, I want to look more closely at how we can use triggering situations as an avenue for repairing those misconstrued views of ourselves that we've accumulated over time. As a quick review, when a situation touches an emotional sensitivity within us, there is an automatic response mechanism that sets our brain into action. It starts working on the perceived problem, evaluating possible reasons why it happened, anticipating and preparing for other potential problems, and seeking resolution. All of this problem solving will be based on the perceptions of ourselves and the coping strategies that we developed when we were young in service to trying to protect and preserve how we have defined our self worth. If left as this reflexive, unprocessed, and unresolved emotional reaction, the triggering situation becomes stored in our brain as yet another painful experience that confirms our misperceptions of ourselves. Now, the brain does not differentiate past, present, and future. This is why fantasies can be so enjoyable. If you are imagining yourself on the beach, as far as your brain is concerned, you are on the beach. But sometimes our daydreams are more like nightmares because when we recall a difficult experience from the past or imagine a potentially challenging situation in the future, our brain also reacts to that as a real time, here and now situation. And with that come all of the same physical responses and emotional reactions associated with that difficult scenario. Then the brain goes into its natural problem solving mode to try to resolve the perceived problem. Now, that often causes us hours of rumination and suffering. But we can also use this capacity of the brain to free ourselves from upsetting emotions that are attached to our memories. And through actually addressing painful emotions from the past, we can bring resolution to those challenging memories that we've held on to for so long. So, this work is an expansion of the reviewing and revising the narrative step that I talked about last time. You can apply this process not only to automatic responses to current situations, but also to painful events from the past. Remember, these are all tied in with that template we have in our minds about ourselves and what we think we need to do in order to be loved and valued. And so, the more of these experiences that we can review and reprocess, the more we can free ourselves from that internal narrative and work to create one that is more accurate, true, and healthy for us. It's like a math equation. Each calculation is affected by all of the ones before it. So, if you come up with a wrong answer, you have to go back and examine all of the steps you took along the way to see where you went wrong. This is one of the reasons our teachers always told us to show our work. If you don't make the appropriate corrections, you will continue to come up with a wrong answer. Similarly, any conclusion that you've come up with that says you are unworthy or unlovable is always a wrong answer, which makes it important to go back to review and revise those miscalculations to see where you went wrong. So I encourage you to keep taking notes for challenging situations that come up so you can use these as opportunities to learn about the mindset you've created about yourself in order to start making corrections to your misperceptions. And as related memories and experiences come to mind, write those down too. All of this is useful information that can enable you to figure out where you went wrong in concluding that you were unworthy or inadequate. So, let's look at some ways we can use these experiences to understand more about our emotional sensitivities and vulnerabilities so that we can be aware of them and also hopefully repair them. And as a reminder, you cannot do this part of the work when you are actively emotionally triggered. You have to tend to the feelings first. This is where we often fail ourselves and others by trying to approach painful emotions with rational thought. These are two completely different languages and come from very different parts of the brain. If you were looking to your significant other for support about something upsetting that happened with a friend, and they just said to you, "Oh, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way," you would not respond, "You know what? You're right. I feel so much better." You would actually feel incredibly discounted, dismissed, and unsupported. This could then even become its own triggering event as you interpret your partner as not caring about your feelings and therefore not caring about you, which further activates that sense of unworthiness. Do you see how messy this gets? And the ultimate benefit of tending to the hurt is that it starts to release upsetting experiences by detaching the painful feelings that are connected to them. It is the unresolved emotions that make us hold on to the memories because the brain views these as important information to retain in order to try to prevent pain in the future. Without the pain, the memory loses its importance. By the way, this is why it is never helpful to tell someone who's struggling with a hurtful experience that they need to let it go. What they actually need to do is connect to their hearts and comfort and soothe themselves through the emotional pain for as long as it takes for the brain to consider that problem to have been resolved. Because then the brain no longer keeps bringing it to their attention and saying, "This still hurts, this still hurts." All right, so I'm going to use the same example that I gave last time about having a negative reaction to your boss asking for a report. One narrative this might trigger is something like, "I can't believe she just came in here and yelled at me about not having that project finished. I've been busting my butt trying to finish it on top of all the other work that keeps getting piled on, some of which isn't even my job. She acts like I sit around here all day doing nothing. She never notices all the work that I do get done, and nothing is ever good enough for her. Why does this happen in every job I have? Is there something wrong with me that I just can't make it in corporate America? What if I get laid off because she thinks I'm not performing? Should I start looking for another job?" So, the first step, again, in processing a painful experience like this, after you've attended to the emotional reaction, is to approach it as an interaction with the other person rather than an action that person took against you. This already gives a little bit more distance from the situation because you can review it as something that happened rather than as something that happened to you. And the goal is to examine what it is about what the other person said or did that interacted with your particular sensitivity. In this example, the perception was that the boss yelled, and the immediate reaction was to feel criticized, which then led to a whole cascade of other painful thoughts and emotions. From this, you would look for a deeper understanding of what happens for you internally when you view someone as being upset or displeased. As we assess the narrative about the situation, let's consider what is the story that's been created about what happened. Not only is the boss's comment interpreted negatively, but there are further negative assumptions made about her overall attitude and generalized, exaggerated characterizations of her that go beyond the immediate incident. She acts like I sit around here all day doing nothing. She never notices all the work I do get done. Nothing is ever good enough for her. When we start making attributions about what others think or feel, we are going well beyond the actual information that we have in that moment. And we inevitably fill in those blanks with projections of our own insecurities. Although this is done in an effort to try to understand what happened, we are really just making up what we think happened based again on that template in our minds about ourselves in relation to others. In this case, there is a desire for approval and recognition from the boss, which very likely ties in with a mindset that your value comes from pleasing others and that you are unworthy if others are displeased. Now, this attitude about the boss seems to come from accumulated experiences of not feeling noticed or recognized by her. But note that those too will be based on perceptions and interpretations from that template about needing approval in order to be valued. So essentially, all of these previous perceptions about the boss, whenever expected approval wasn't obtained, became filed away as grievances against her that then resurfaced in response to this current situation. As I mentioned last time, this is one of the biggest risks of not doing the work to move past our initial automatic responses, because these grievances inevitably lead to resentment and add more fuel to the fire whenever the automatic response is triggered again. I will talk about this in more detail when I do a video about relationships, because spouses are notorious for hanging on to grievances and building resentments that then get acted on and aired out in future conflicts. Now let's look at that statement. I've been busy busting my butt trying to finish it on top of all the other work, some of which isn't even my job. Now, this suggests a tendency to take on extra work to try to secure praise, and a reflex of feeling unappreciated if praise is not delivered. Praise and approval are like candy. They may be temporarily sweet and satisfying, but they do not nourish or sustain us. Consider this. If, as children, we formulated the idea that our worth and value came through getting approval from others, what does that mean about our worth and value when praise is not forthcoming? The absence of these is equated with being unworthy and unlovable, such that no amount of recognition can ever fill that void. That's really where the nothing is ever good enough comment comes from. It is impossible to be actively approved of by another person constantly, and then any hint of criticism undermines all of it. Remember that the behaviors we developed in childhood as an attempt to secure our parents' love don't apply very well to our adult experiences. And when we think those childhood rules of engagement have been violated in some way, we feel frustrated and hurt because it doesn't fit our script about how things are supposed to go. The more we delve into our reactions to situations and the narrative those reactions are based on, the more we can trace them back to the rules and patterns we established as children, so we can revise them and no longer hold ourselves or others to them. This scenario with the boss also points out how we often catastrophize a challenging situation, playing out hypothetical repercussions of what we think just happened. What if I get laid off? Should I start looking for another job? Here you see a tendency to try to anticipate other potential problems that could develop from the initial perceived problem, which the brain will then also try to come up with a solution for. What if is always a clue for this. This anticipatory mechanism is great for an actual potential problem for which we can figure out and implement a real solution. For example, oh, my low fuel light has come on. What if I run out of gas? Potential problem. I better go fill up. Real solution. But you can't solve a problem that doesn't actually exist. So, this type of thinking related to our perceived unworthiness in an interpersonal interaction only amplifies the significance we end up placing on that situation and increases our anxiety and distress. In this case, what started as an unsettling conversation with the boss has spiraled into the worst case scenario of the boss deciding to fire you. And don't forget, you've already concluded that you're not cut out for corporate America and are questioning your value and worth as an employee. So the thought of looking for another job under those circumstances can create even more stress and anxiety. And remember this whole scenario was made up in your mind to begin with. If this entire automatic reaction remains unchallenged, then you are now left with multiple problems of your own creation that will weigh heavily on your mind. Let's look further at the statement. Why does this happen in every job I have? Is there something wrong with me? Global statements and generalizations that we make about ourselves or about others will typically stem from that pattern recognition I've talked about before. In service to efficiency, our brain will match a current situation to past experiences and events that seem to resemble it. But for the sake of that efficiency, we sacrifice accuracy such that we perpetually relive that old narrative in our here and now experiences unless we do this deeper level of work to override that. And that's why it's so helpful to examine and address any memories arising from past experiences that resonate with what we think just happened in the current situation. These enable us to more fully understand what our internalized narrative is. And this doesn't mean we have to do deep excavating to dig up old painful memories that have been buried for decades. In fact, our brain is good about presenting us with the information we need if we allow that to come to us. An easy way to facilitate this might be to ask yourself, what does this remind me of? Whatever the triggering situation resonates with will make itself known to us if we are open to it. In this example, the brain has accessed its file of experiences classified as work failures, which are accumulated misperceptions of yourself in the past, in past positions and past jobs that are now evidence that proves your feelings of unworthiness and incompetence. A person who seeks approval in the workplace to prove their own value and worth will often not receive that. And this will register as failure and be stuffed into that work failures file, which goes with us from job to job, perpetuating that scenario over and over again and leading to false and very painful conclusions. As a reminder, when we are doing this work, it is very important to attend to whatever challenging emotions arise from those past events and recognize that those too were filed away as automatic responses rather than as processed experiences. The goal in doing this work is not to cause more pain. In fact, the pain is already in there, and this is an effort to try to relieve and release it once and for all. And because we are talking about things from the past, you've already been through the most painful part just by having experienced whatever it is in the first place. When we provide caring, comfort, and compassion to ourselves in response to these emotional injuries, we can become free from the pain that we have been carrying and can then more objectively observe and reevaluate the experiences that have caused us pain. And this is an ongoing process, not something we do once and then we're done. So, as you do this work, how might you revise and refile challenging memories based on what you're learning about your emotional sensitivity and about that template in your brain that it imposes on encounters that you have? For each situation, look at the conclusions you made about yourself at that time and ask, is this really true? And then consider what other possible conclusions might be valid. This is where it is helpful to draw from whatever more objective knowledge you have to assist with revising the narrative. Again, once you have comforted yourself through the initial emotions that get brought up. For the triggering situation about your boss, what examples can you retrieve that reflect the fact that she actually does value you and your work? And what about those previous jobs? Can you recognize the successes you had there and forgive yourself for the mistakes you made? Can your list of job failures be reclassified as stepping stones to the job you have now? Is it possible to give approval to yourself as being a competent and capable employee and start freeing yourself of expecting this from others? And even if you still think your boss might be irritated with you, can you right size this incident down to more reasonable proportions rather than leaving it in its original supersized state based on your automatic emotional reaction? And let's look at that for a moment. What if your boss was actually mad? Looking at our automatic emotional responses doesn't mean that people in present time don't ever objectively behave in ways that seem unkind or hurtful. But our mindset about ourselves and our individual emotional sore spots complicate our interpretations of those situations and intensify our reactions to them. So, doing this work does not mean that you won't ever experience the behavior of others as being upsetting or disturbing. What this allows you to do is to separate their actions from your own personal narrative so you can hopefully respond to and address the here and now situation more clearly from an objective standpoint, separate from that distorted personal history. To give you an easy physical analogy, if someone steps on your foot, it's going to hurt, period. It registers as a painful experience, whether it was accidental or intentional. It might hurt more if you think the person stepped on it on purpose. And if that foot is already vulnerable from a previous injury, it will hurt even further. In all three cases, the foot hurts when it is stepped on, but the extent to which it hurts will vary based on those other variables. Similarly, in challenging interactions between ourselves and others, it would be impossible to prevent all emotional pain, but we can minimize its impact by more fully recognizing what is happening between You and the other person. What part is his or hers? What part is yours? And what can you do about your part? If I perceive another person's behavior as coming from something going on with them, it will register differently than if I perceive it as being about me and interpret it as a reflection of my value and worth. It is also important to recognize that just as our responses to situations represent an interaction between the other person's behavior and our own personal sensitivities, so too are that person's reactions to us based on their own emotional vulnerabilities. So if a boss does come across to you as angry about not getting a report as quickly as she wanted it, that may very well be tied in with an interpretation that she's making. For example, she might think that you don't value her leadership or that you don't make her requests a priority. Or she might be concerned about something in that report that reflects on her competence in her position and her efforts to be approved of due to her own self esteem and self worth issues. We can't know why another person is acting or reacting the way they are unless they directly explain it to us. And it is not fair to them or helpful to us to assume the worst about what their motives and intentions are. We also don't have control over their behavior, so trying to figure out possible ways to prevent certain reactions from them will typically not serve us well and will likely just create more anxiety. What we can take control over is the part we play in our own interpretations of and reactions to the interactions so we don't blow them out of proportion for ourselves. And perhaps as we learn to consistently connect to our hearts and respond to our own emotional challenges with compassion and forgiveness, we can have more empathy and compassion for the people that we interact with as well. Because the reality is that we are all truly just trying to get through each day in the best way that we know how. Take care. I'll see you next week.